right, let's get started. We've got the retirement red zone. Are you ready for the retirement red zone? Thanks for being with us. And we're just about ready to start our webinar. As you may know, we do a webinar each quarter, both on a financial planning subject matter and an economic and market update, which we'll have in about 6 weeks coming up on the market update. Thanks for being with us and welcome. I'm Chris Boyd, and I will be hosting along with a group of our advisors from Asset Management Resources for the webinar today. And remember that content from today's presentation has been derived from sources thought to be reliable, but opinions and circumstances are subject to change. So please keep abreast of changing issues in a variety of ways. Remember that this is dated. Today is, September 20th. And be sure to consult your financial advisor or us if we can be of help regarding your own personal circumstances. Contents from today's presentation are general in nature, not intended to be financial advice to you without knowing the full circumstances of your personal financial situation. We will have a full slide for compliance at the end of our presentation. Let me introduce you to who will be joining us. Today, I'm joined by Scott Birmingham. He is our lead financial planner and chief compliance officer. Jeff Perry is an investment advisory representative with Asset Management Resources, as is Jeff Tamaning, who is a wealth manager. Thank you all for being here. And let me just tell you a little bit about what we have in mind for today's program. What is the retirement red zone, and why is this time so important in your planning? As we near retirement, perhaps within the 5 years approaching retirement, we need to do some preparations. There's a lot of things to consider. One of them, along the lines of considerations are the more qualitative. Who am I if I'm not my working self? How do I spend my time to bring enjoyment and fulfillment into my life? When I'm not working, how will we provide for spending funds? Will I take a pension? If I do, should I take it as a lump sum or a lifetime income? Do I include my spouse? When I turn on Social Security, when should I turn it on? From which investment accounts should we withdraw first? There's a variety of questions. When it comes to health considerations, how do I plan for insurance? Should I get on Medicare if I'm too young for Medicare? What do I do? When it comes to potential for longevity, there's potential for many years of retirement. Will we have enough? The questions of long-term care expenses, or what if I have an early demise? And of course, how do I plan for legacy? That's not only estate planning documents for healthcare concerns or incapacity or when I die, but also passing on values as well as things. So this is the scope of what we hope to cover. And if you have questions, there is an opportunity to ask questions with the Q&A button, or you can share comments as well. At the end of the talk, we will allow time for questions. This presentation may go a little longer than usual, probably be a little over an hour is our expectation. So if you have questions at the end, you can also raise your hand and we can unmute your line. So with that, let's get started with other comments here. Let me just kick things off with, there are times that we hear about these all too familiar and somewhat sad circumstances where people die young right out of the gate. These people died just within days of retirement. This poor gentleman died at his retirement party. I share these with awkward levity, simply because sometimes people fear retirement because of stories like this. And that said, it is true that as we prepare for retirement, we must consider the change in identity as well as our financial circumstances. How often it is that we associate what we do with who we are. So retirement can be a difficult change if we're not moving towards something. So it's not only the completion of a goal that may have been many years in the making to have financial freedom, but it is also now a time of reimaginings, uh, who we are and how we will spend our time. Um, don't underestimate the importance of planning around the qualitative issues in this retirement red zone. So to get us started in this, let me turn things over to Jeff Tamaning to talk about this change in identity. Jeff?
Hello, everyone. Thanks, Chris. You talked here about changed identity. One thing that I've seen over the past few years is how there is a changing, um, I would say, definition around retirement, and it's not always the traditional. Okay, I'm going to go sit on a beach or be um, hang out on a golf course, hang out with my grandkids. In some ways, what I've seen for a lot of individuals and families is it becomes a time when you no longer have to work. And maybe you want to work, but it's not necessarily for the money anymore. So I would also keep that in mind, because a lot of what we're going to be talking about today is going to be around the finances. And for some people, as Chris was saying, you've identified as being whatever professional you were in the workforce for so many years. Um, and fortunately or unfortunately, we've seen people who that's been such a big part of their lives that when they've stopped doing that, they've kind of lost that sense of purpose. So that's something to be aware of. And a lot of what we want to do today is get you in the right mindset as far as thinking about the retirement years, or as I was saying earlier, the years where you don't necessarily you might be working, but it's not because you have to, it's because you want to. Um, what I like about this checklist is that it gives us an opportunity to get in that mindset and ask those questions so we're thinking, hey, these are what we're looking at in the years ahead. So these are things to ask yourself. Do you know when you want to retire? Um, do you want to retire early? Maybe for years you've thought, okay, well, 65, that's when Medicare kicks in. 67, that's when Social Security kicks in. That's when I'm going to retire. You know, is there is there a possibility that you want to retire a little earlier? If so, then that's when you're going to talk to the financial professionals to see, if that's going to be feasible for you. Do you want to slow down, work part time, as I was saying earlier? Um, if during your working years you decide to take sabbaticals, how is that going to affect your putting money away for retirement in the future? Um, so I believe we're going to have some of these slides available, but there's some good checklists on them. If not, you can reach out to us and we'll be able to get them to you. But these are some good questions for you to ask yourself as you're preparing for retirement. And you're in that red zone, not necessarily the day before you come in or the hour before you come in and see us about your retirement meeting. So definitely take a look at these questions, see if it triggers any ideas for what you would like to do during the quote retirement years. Next slide, please. Here's another worksheet for you. Um, I think it's a good idea to be intentional about how you want to spend your days. What is your perfect day in retirement? What does the perfect week look like? With whom are you spending it? What are the activities you're doing? When are you getting up each day? You don't have to come up with these ideas right away, but it's something to think about. And then when you do think about that, this is at the micro level each day, each week, then that's going to lead up to, okay, this is what I want my life to look like. How can I fund that life? And the more intentional you are about this, the better set up you are for success. Next slide, please. Now here's where we're going to get into, I would say, the meat of our presentation. Um, you know, we look at this as there's 7 strong steps to help you achieve your retirement goals. One would be to set goal priorities. If you make the mistake of trying to tackle all your goals at once, you're going to end up feeling overwhelmed and stressed. And that's why it's so important to set these priorities so you can focus your energy on where it's needed most. When setting retirement goals, consider this framework. Let's say there are 5 areas of retirement: growth, your personal growth, community, health, your physical and emotional health, giving back, perhaps finances. They're going to differ from person to person, but let's just throw those out. Start by gauging your energy in each of these areas. What kind of energy, where do you need help with that? And just pick one of those areas. Choose only one of those areas to tackle first. Tackle, we're in the retirement red zone. Yes, football. We recommend going with the category that you scored the lowest in first, because that's typically the culprit for dragging your overall energy level down. So it doesn't mean that you forget about the rest, but just choose one at a time. It simply means you're focusing on one now, and you'll get to the others later. Micro-step your way to success. One of the biggest mistakes people make is thinking they need to accomplish everything all at once. I think we're all guilty of it at times. We get ideas and we think we can just do it all. It's not realistic, and it sets you up for overwhelm, getting stuck, in disappointment. So instead, break your goals into small, manageable pieces that you can work on a little bit each day. We like to call them micro steps, and the magic formula of mini goals and micro steps: you can kill procrastination, get anything done. So stop the procrastination, follow the magic formula of micro steps and mini goals. This can help you achieve any goal. And there's research from the Stanford School of Business that suggests you can increase your motivation and chances of success by focusing on the small sub goals instead of the overall goal. So for instance, if your retirement life goal, one of your retirement goals is to write a book, maybe a memoir or whatever, your micro steps might look something like this. 1, research the book ideas for, let's say, 20 minutes a day until you land an idea that you love. 2, come up with a working title, outline 20 minutes daily until it's complete. 3, write, 500 words daily until you have X number of chapters. And then 4, edit what you wrote for 20 minutes every day until it's complete. So you get the idea. You make so much more progress with daily micro steps than if you were to take, let's say, a 2-week break and say, all right, I'm going to cram it all into the 7 hours, like many of us probably did in college. Consistency is the way to get there without all the stress, by taking small, consistent daily steps toward your goal. Plus, you'll even learn to enjoy the process, which is another huge piece of adopting that growth mindset that hopefully you're continuing to have in your retirement. 3, be smart. My colleague Jeff here on the line, we talk about this all the time. He's talking about it on the radio show. Be smart. It's not just enough to have goals. You need to make sure they're the right type of goals. They're specifically outlined, and an effective way to do that is by using the SMART goal setting method. And it's popular for a reason. So SMART, the acronyms: be specific. The more specific your goal, the better your plan and actionable steps towards taking it. M, measurable. If you can measure your progress, you'll be more likely to stay on track. A, achievable. Make sure your goal is realistic and achievable so you don't get discouraged along the way, or worse, set a pipe dream. Relevant. Choose a goal that aligns with your values and what's important to you. And time bound. Give yourself a deadline for accountability so you don't get sidetracked. An example could be, let's say your goal is to make more friends. A SMART mini goal would be, I will join a meetup group and other social activities and attend an event or gathering every week for the next 6 months. So you're very specific. You're hitting all of those letters in the acronym, and that's a goal you can work towards. 4, make your life goals tangible. The simple act of writing your goals down can help your motivation. Um, I see it all the time, especially with the advent of laptops and iPads. The difference between typing something in versus writing it down. It can certainly help your motivation. So when you take the time to physically write out your life goals, it makes them more real and tangible. So you can refer to them easily whenever you need a motivational boost. Plus, seeing your goals in writing helps you focus and track your progress over time, making sure that you make adjustments as needed. So, not to mention, an often cited study, writing down your goals increases your chances of completing them by over 40%. So, grab a paper and pen or open up a doc on your computer, start jotting down your life goals for retirement. Better yet, make them visible. Keep them in a place where you see them every day. You can make it the wallpaper on your phone or your computer so you'll see them all the time. You could also put them on your fridge, your car, anywhere else that's convenient for you. So to sum it up, the more you see your goals, the more focused you'll be and the more likely you'll be to achieve them. Identifying potential obstacles. Anyone who's ever tried to achieve a goal knows that obstacles are inevitable. Stuff hits the fan. It's going to happen. What separates successful people from those who fail is the ability to identify and overcome those obstacles. And this is where that self-awareness comes in. According to a study on the effect of self-awareness on the identification of goal-related obstacles, people who are more self-aware are better able to identify those potential obstacles along the way. It makes sense. Without self-awareness, you'd be kind of like a ship at sea without a rudder, constantly blown off course by the first strong wind that comes along. But with it, you can recognize when you're veering off track and course correct. And knowing that's half the battle. The other half is embracing those obstacles and learning from them along the way. Number 6, get an accountability partner. It's no secret one of the best ways to achieve your life goals is finding someone who will hold you accountable. There's no number of studies on this. Having someone to answer to makes it much more likely that you'll see your objectives through to completion. Who should that person be? That's certainly up to you. I know that researchers have discovered that individuals who were more committed to and successful with their goals when they shared them with someone they perceived as having a higher status than themselves. In other words, if you want to improve your odds of reaching your life goals in retirement, make sure you share your objectives with someone who's a bit further ahead than you are. It could be a friend, family member, even a life coach if you're willing to invest in expert help and shortcut your way to success. And the important thing is that you choose someone who will take your goals seriously and give you honest feedback along the way. To give ourselves a plug here at AMR, when it comes to the financial side of things, we're happy to be your coach. That's something that we can help you along with on the financial side of things. Not that we don't want to hear about the non-financial stuff, because obviously that's a part of the whole financial planning process, but that is one of the things we try to help people with along the way, is the financial coaching part of financial planning. So don't hesitate to ask for help when you set goals in retirement, whether it's the qualitative or the quantitative, which my colleagues are going to be talking about shortly. And then 7, celebrate your successes. Last but not least, don't forget to celebrate your successes along the way. Life goals in retirement are often about big wins, but equally as important are the little wins inside your process. Take the time to enjoy every step of the way. If you decide to take up golf and you finally break 100, you're just like, wow, that's cool. Celebrate that. Breaking 90, breaking 80, breaking 120, whatever that number is. Celebrate that. No goal is too small to celebrate, and every step you take gets you closer to the ultimate goal. So the small wins they matter just as much, if not more. Next slide, please, Chris. So as far as the 5 possible stages of retirement, these are, this is, when we look at pre-retirement, what are the things that we've done? We've talked a little about this. You're going to be doing a lot of preparation, both on I would say the financial side and on the non-financial side, which is what I just talked about. There's a lot of anticipation. You're going to be excited. Some people are concerned, like what is their life going to look like? But just again, being aware of this. So those are the pre-retirement things that are going on. At full retirement, yeah, there's this liberation or honeymoon phase. We're like, all right, this is cool. I don't have to go into work every day. I don't have to listen to my boss. I don't have to drive however many hours I was driving each week. Some people will take a prolonged vacation, and now you're ready to welcome the new routines. Hey, I'm having breakfast every morning. I'm eating healthy. I'm taking walks. You're in there. Um, there are, for many, there's the stage of disenchantment. There is boredom when you haven't done a lot of the preparation. Even if you have done the preparation, that doesn't mean you're not going to get bored, but it can still happen. The more preparation you do, the better likely you're going to be able to address the disenchantment side. Um, Loneliness, feeling useless, loss of identity. As I was saying earlier, if one of your goals was to make more friends, then you can kind of break that back down into the micro steps and say, all right, I'm going to do something specific. I'm going to join a meetup group. I'm going to go to the local senior center. I'm going to go to the golf course, to the yoga studio, what it is, and just go meet people. Reorientation, reinvention, new identity, finding purpose and meaningful outlets. Hopefully, as you continue to progress in retirement, you're going to be, as Chris was saying earlier, you're changing your own identity, and finding these new things that invigorate you. And finally, hopefully, you're going to have that reconciliation and stability. And you're going to find that simplified lifestyle, and you're going to get into that routine that works for you. And if you're still with someone, with a partner and other family. So you know, all right, this is when I'm having my lunch every day. This is when I'm going to the gym. This is when I'm hanging out with my friends who were retired before me or who are still working. Um, and then finally, also talking a little about legacy, which certainly we're going to be able to talk to you about on the financial and estate planning side of things, but really thinking about what you want to happen in the long term for the assets that you've saved. That pretty much does it for me, Chris.
Nice job, Jeff. Thank you. That was well done. A lot to consider, a lot to think about as people near that retirement area, and hopefully have ease into it with comfort and a sense of fulfillment. So lots to think about. Next up, we're going to have Scott Birmingham talk to us a little bit about planning for the cash flow, a little bit more into the financial considerations of what are the things we need to be thinking about as to how to plan for the money part of it. Scott?
Sure. So we're going to discuss essentially navigating your income options and discussion points as you near retirement. So historically, they used to refer to your retirement cash flow as the three-legged stool. One being Social Security retirement benefits. So we'll discuss around that, when to take it, concerning you, your spouse, your comfort level, all the details around that. Pensions, number two, which although not the norm today, we still see plenty of clients walk in the door with one or even more pensions. So we'll go over the details around that. Investments, as we sit down with clients, we'll be initiating discussions around things like risk. Typically, as you get closer to retirement, your tendency is to become more conservative, take a little less risk with your portfolio. So we're trying to gauge that and get a good handle on that as you get a little closer to retirement. And then before I jump to that, and also expectations around your portfolio. So what can you provide for cash flow? So we're talking about investments. We usually start out with folks. What is the 4% rule is kind of a thing most folks know, kind of rule of thumb. Basically says someone age 65, for simple math, let's say has $1 million. They could withdraw approximately $40,000, 4%, during a typical retirement without running out money. Obviously, this is very simplified, and we're going to do a lot of projections and cash flow and projections, but that's kind of a rule of thumb just for thinking purposes. Also among that, we've been discussing allocating your money essentially among buckets. When I say buckets, when do you need that money? So maybe there's a bucket of money for immediate cash flow needs. Maybe there's another bucket for 5+ years, another bucket for 10+ years. And those different buckets would be allocated differently based on risks. Again, that'll involve us running some cash flow scenarios on your needs. And lastly, kind of mentioning to what Jeff T was just talking about, would be part-time work. A lot of folks, whether it's I'm going to cut my hours a bit, or maybe I'll do some consulting. I see a lot of that. Or even there's a passion project that they want to do. We think that's more the norm today than rather just stay at home and golf a lot. It just seems to be people want to do something more. I think it's part of longevity. I think it's more of that active lifestyle. Jump ahead, Chris. So we've got a little hypothetical couple here. Ross and Rachel are 58 years old. They're both thinking of retiring at 63. That's their goal, retire 4 years early, so in 5 years. Ross has a 401k. Dollar amounts here are irrelevant. They also have a joint brokerage account. And lastly, Rachel has an expected pension. So our discussion probably starts out, maybe at least looking at a timeline, maxing out our retirement plans prior to retirement. So do we need to maybe save as much as possible prior to retirement to get to our goals? So that'd be our first discussion point. So I thought I'd bring up catch-up provisions. If you are age 50 and older, you're allowed catch-up contributions on your retirement plans. 401k, for example, allows an additional $7,500 a year. So that would bring up the maximum you could put into $30,000 a year. As a little caveat on that, starting in 2024, if you earn more than $145,000 in the prior calendar year, meaning 2023, all catch-up contributions will need to be made to a Roth portion of the 401k. Should I be saving to a Roth versus a traditional 401k? That's a whole other webinar, okay? IRAs, be it traditional or a Roth IRA, allows you to put in an additional $1,000 a year. So that would bring your total possible contribution up to $7,500 a year. Health savings accounts, one of my favorites. This one's a little different because it's age 55 and older rather than 50 for the other two. You can contribute an additional $1,000 a year. So for a person who has an HSA through work, they could have an individual plan, say they're single or they set it up for themselves. That's $3,850 a year. If they were to set up a family plan, it's $7,750 a year. So if that one spouse has an HSA through work, they could do $1,000 extra. If both spouses have their own individual HSAs through their own employers, they each could do an additional $1,000. Okay. Lastly, simple IRAs for the self-employed. That's an additional $3,500 a year, bringing your total possible contribution up to $19,000 a year. Okay, next slide, Chris. Next on the timeline is usually discussion around Social Security. In this scenario, they both plan to work to 63, so it probably would not make sense to take it to 62, but we'll talk about that. So Social Security benefits, age 62 is the earliest you can take your retirement benefit, whether it's you as having worked and accumulated a retirement benefit, or as your spouse who may want to use their spousal benefit, which we'll talk about. Spousal benefit is really based on a spouse's or ex-spouse's, if you're divorced, work record. They can receive retirement benefits based on their own work record or the spouse benefit, but obviously not both. So in this case, for both persons, age 62. Full retirement age for most of the folks we're sitting down with these days is 67 or pretty close to that, 66 and 3/4, something like that. Same effect for the spousal. So full retirement age will give you what is referred to as the primary insurance amount. We're never going to use that term in a meeting. You probably won't see it that often, but basically it refers to the benefit a person can receive if he or she elects to begin receiving benefits at their normal retirement age or full retirement age, okay? And then this is usually the part where we're having discussions with folks. When do you want to take it? When can you take it? So if you were to take it earlier than your full retirement age, let's say it's 67 in this case, for every year prior to 67 that you start your retirement benefit, it's reduced 5 to 6.7 per year. There's calculations based on that. But that reduction affects your monthly payment for a lifetime. So that also needs to be factored in. You may need to start it early based on your situation. You may not need to take it early. So we're going to run scenarios around that. On the opposite end of that, if you were to delay your benefit, meaning past 67, it would be increased every year by approximately 7.5 to 8% a year. So again, your payment would be 7.5 to 8% a year bigger every month for a lifetime, which has quite a big effect should you have longevity. So the discussion here is, what are you comfortable with? Do you have longevity in your family? Do you have assets to delay? So I put that off to 68, 69, 70. Do I have investments I can draw from that allow me to delay that? So again, we'll be looking at your cash flow, your investments, tax brackets to see what works out best for you in these scenarios. Okay. Next would be a discussion and analysis on how and when to take the money, essentially drawdown strategies. Starting in the middle, sequential strategy, kind of the classic approach, where you withdraw from your taxable accounts first, then your tax-deferred accounts, meaning 401ks, IRAs. The idea is that if you have a tax-deferred account, I want to leave that as long as possible to grow tax-deferred and refrain from paying taxes on that. Allows it to accumulate at a better rate. And then lastly, tax-free accounts would be last. So a Roth, possibly an HSA. Those give you a little bit of flexibility, but if, in a perfect world, if I could leave that as long as possible to grow tax-free, that's a great feature. So that's the classic approach, which usually works out best for most folks. But we're going to go to the programs and run different scenarios. Another scenario is a pro rata strategy, which is on the left, which basically means withdrawing from your taxable, your tax-deferred, and your tax-free, but proportionally. And again, that's different for everybody. Some folks don't have a Roth. A lot of folks are heavily weighted in the retirement accounts that typically come in the door. So it's usually not optimal. But again, we'll run that scenario and see what works out best, or a combination. And then lastly, which we're doing quite a bit these days, is the classic approach: taxable first, tax-deferred, then tax-free. But in the years where you've maybe just started retirement and your tax bracket is lower and your income is lower, it might make sense to start using some of those retirement accounts and do Roth conversions. Essentially, you are setting yourself up to pay less taxes in the future. We're in a great tax era right now where tax bracket is pretty low. And also you'll be accumulating a tax-free bucket, essentially, to use in the future. So it might be for you, it might be for your heirs, but it usually makes sense to take a look at this every single year. Should we do a Roth conversion? How much would be optimal for you in that year? Do you have assets to pay it, and so forth? But those are the three basic drawdown strategies we'll be looking at for your retirement accounts. Next would be pensions. Rachel has a pension. It'll be optimal, paying the highest amount. Should be 66. Thanks, Chris. So the basic options are: one, receiving a lump sum, pretty straightforward. You roll it over to your IRA or multiple IRAs, depending on what we're proposing. Single life annuities, joint survivor annuities. So these are your pension or annuity income options. People choose these usually when they're looking for predictable income, when they're maybe a little more conservative and they want to have a paycheck that they can't outlive. Downside is really there's lack of availability of those funds. Essentially, you've given up that money for a paycheck. Nothing wrong with it. It's just for the folks who are a little more conservative. So when that may be your maybe where you're leaning, then the discussion falls around what is our choice? Do you choose single life annuity? If you're married, maybe we're looking at joint survivor annuity. It all depends on everybody's situation, but the typical joint survivor annuities, 100% to you, 100% to your spouse, which is going to give you a lower payment than the single life annuity. A smaller payment to you and 75% to your spouse, or 50% to your spouse. Again, it all depends on your other spouse's available assets. So in this case, Ross. Is Ross going to be a good position if you were to pass away early and maybe you set him up for only 50% of the benefit, or you took the single life annuity? It's possible they might have enough assets. It's not an issue, but we're going to run those scenarios to see what would happen where you pass away and that annuity feature were either to disappear or diminish in a smaller percentage. So,
and just a quick note, Scott, for people listening, we're referring to annuitization. The reality is some people in a pension might call it option A, B, or C, or there's different ways to refer to what we're talking about here. We're just thinking in terms of the way it's expressed in annuitization. So just for clarity.
Thank you. Good point, Chris. And then just referring back to this, everybody wants to know what happens to Ross and Rachel. So in this scenario, Ross does start his retirement at 63. He's retiring early, but he wants to keep busy. So he's going to rent overpriced umbrellas to tourists at Craigville Beach while Rachel's at the office. Rachel, she has a pension. She wants to hang on to that and maximize it. So she works at 66 so she can get the maximum pension. Based on their assets, Rachel's still working, then her pension, that allows them to delay their Social Security and maximize it till 70. So that puts them in a good position. But again, all this is done by us running multiple scenarios, seeing what works best for them, what's their comfort level for work. And that involves us looking at their net worth, portfolio reviews, looking at their allocation. And when I say allocation, we're looking at their allocation today, what their comfort level is today. But we run projections, we're going to make that a little more conservative over time because folks typically get more conservative as they age. So we're not going to run, if you came in as, say, a moderate investor with 65% allocated to stocks, we're not going to project that till age 90. We're going to make that more conservative so you get a more realistic look at what your accounts kind of pan into over retirement in our projections. And then cash flow. I'll just real quickly, I didn't mention that before. Expenses are a huge piece of this. And in those pre-retirement years, we may want to be looking at those expenses and have you start to get a good handle on what that is, because that is a big driver in these projections and your retirement. Whether it's you being connected to our program, where we could connect your bank accounts and credit cards and you get a good idea what your cash flow is, or you break out a spreadsheet or connect to Mint or whatever works best for you. If we have some data going into retirement, knowing what you spend on an average of the month, that's going to be just great information. And if you need to make some adjustments based on your spending habits, again, more info is better. So I just point that out. Again, retirement projections, we run these typically age 92 for a male, 94 for a female. And basically you're looking to see, essentially, do your assets last based on what you're spending, based on how you're allocated, taxes, Social Security, pensions are all factored in there. And then a big one is running Social Security analysis for folks. When do I take it? We'll be running those year after year as you get a little closer to those retirement and Social Security decisions. But these are the things that happen every year in follow-up meetings as we update your plan.
It is important, Scott, to do those updates periodically to see if things are on track, because things can change with, obviously, markets. This last year or two, we've seen inflation assumptions change. Just the reality of how things play out. And of course, our own circumstances when it comes to health or whatever, all of these can have varying impact on how we think about the projections that we might make for assumptions looking forward. So we certainly want to be paying attention in case things look like they might start to go off the rails. We want to take corrective action, but most times these projections give us a real good sense of how the range of possibilities might play out. Thanks, Scott. That's really helpful information, and a good overview of the kind of things that are really important as you're getting close to retirement, and certainly well within retirement, how to plan and make decisions. Don't do it in a vacuum. Do it with some help, some modeling, forecasting of how things play out. Too often, people will have committed to decisions that might have been beneficial to have some conversation around, say, the timing of a pension or the choices that they might make, or when to turn on Social Security, whatever it might be. So if we can be of help in that process, let us play that role to guide you with some advice. The decision is always yours. Next, we're going to talk about health considerations. And in so doing, I think there's a lot to consider. But if you are retiring before age 65, this is one of those considerations that may be affecting some people. What do you do for health insurance if you aren't yet eligible, say, for Medicare? So one of the considerations we identify here is that you could be eligible for COBRA, which is an extension of your employer plan for up to 18 months after you leave your employer. In Massachusetts, the average cost of a COBRA insurance was around just under $400 a month. In Massachusetts, there's also the masshealthconnector.org, which is a way to look at what plans you might be eligible to utilize independent of an employer. And if you're outside of Massachusetts, there is the website that the Affordable Care Act created as other healthcare options. So they're basically the same concept, that you may have other choices, but varying degrees of out-of-pocket costs in that process. So obviously, the cheaper things are, the more you might be looking at in your own expenses. Next, is the topic of Medicare. Now, as it turns out, we just held a webinar last quarter, a seminar webinar, where we talked about Social Security and Medicare. And so I would point you for a detailed understanding of how Medicare works to our website in the webinars section, and you'll see the topic of the Social Security and Medicare presentation for a detailed review. But when it comes to Medicare, there's really the ABCDs that we need to talk about. And essentially, Part A refers to hospital insurance coverage that deals with inpatient hospital care, some brief skilled nursing facility care, hospice, tests for labs and things like that. So surgeries and so forth. These are all things that can be covered under the Part A. When it comes to Part B, and this is what covers your doctor's visits and the healthcare provider services on an outpatient care. When it comes to the Part A and Part B, these are largely covered as an 80-20 plan. So there is some out-of-pocket cost, and this is when people often talk about the use of a Medigap or a supplemental plan. You see a lot of ads for these at a certain time of year, as we're getting close to that time of year where we'll be bombarded by those advertisements trying to encourage you to either get on a Medicare supplement Medigap plan or an alternative approach, which I'll talk about momentarily. So this is where your premiums, outside of what you pay through your Social Security, to the government, this is where people often have costs for their insurance. There is also Medicare Advantage plans. These are sometimes referred to as Part C, where in lieu of the other parts, you might opt into an HMO or a PPO kind of a program, and it would, instead of having a Medigap, you might have this HMO where you you go to your physician first before you go in for other medical services. These can be cheaper, but they also may be more limiting at times. Medicare Part D refers to the prescription drug coverages, and this is also something that you have to choose payment for. Massachusetts is much more streamlined than some other jurisdictions in terms of what the offerings are when it comes to the different kinds of supplemental plans, for example. So there's a lot to consider. Where you are, the geography you're in can make a difference on thinking about this. Again, check out the webinar that we had last month, or we also had something more with Chris Boyd podcast with Susan Flanagan of Blue Cross Blue Shield on July 22nd of this year. You can maybe learn more there as well as a starting point. Let's talk about HSAs a bit that Scott mentioned earlier. These are when people have an employer plan that has a high deductible associated with it. It is helpful to potentially have some pre-tax savings that can be associated with these kinds of plans. And sometimes people have strategies where they may want to reserve some of this money for later in life in their retirement by holding on to the instead of using it for their copays, but oftentimes they're intended to be used to help pay for qualifying medical expenses. On a pre-tax basis, you're able to take money out of your paycheck and put it into the HSA. Sometimes your employer will contribute to the HSA. That money is pre-tax to you. And when you take it out for these qualifying medical expenses, you can use that money in an untaxed way. So it is very appealing. Using the untaxed dollars, you can use them for deductibles, co-payments, co-insurance, and some other expenses that you may have that are out of pocket. They generally may not be used to fund premiums, though. While you can use the funds in an HSA at any time to pay for qualified medical expenses, you may contribute to an HSA only if you have this high deductible health plan that your employer provides. So it's not available to everyone. And as I started to say, sometimes people will decide to defer use of their HSA for later in life to allow it to compound and grow. Some HSAs can be found where they're held at an account at a bank or a credit union, but others can be in financial institutions where they can have investment opportunities associated with them. So sometimes people use this as a sinking fund where they may intend to use it later in life for long-term care costs or things of that sort, or rise when they might have increased medical care costs. These are some of the numbers that you can contribute to your HSA, and Scott covered that to some extent earlier. Next, I just wanted to touch on the notion that, when we think about retirement, one of the questions is, how long are we going to live? And that's certainly relevant to thinking about projections. We've seen over time that mortality is growing. And although, that may have changed in the last year or two with COVID, we've seen some of those numbers decline a bit. The trajectory over time is that people have been living longer over the last century. And so we're benefited by that, but we have to plan accordingly. And one of the things you may want to consider as you think about this is if you're in retirement, oftentimes people decide where they're going to live. And you may want to look at which states have greater longevity. This chart, some of the darker green states tend to have greater longevity. So we're fortunate, most of our clientele are here in Massachusetts, but if you're in Florida or Hawaii, you might benefit from better longevity figures. The life expectancy of someone born in 2020 is to age 77, which is terrific. What is it though for those of us who've been around for a little while? If you're at age 70, the life expectancy of a man is to age 83, almost 84, and for a woman to age 86. But of course, this changes as we go through retirement at age 85, and I'm just going to shorthand this. Life expectancy is around age 91. So retirees not only need to plan for the financial possibilities of longevity, but also just in case they don't, for their spouse or their family. So it's not only about mortality considerations, but also morbidity considerations. Morbidity is how healthy will I be while I'm alive? And the idea here is we're seeing these chronic and maybe pre-retirement years. If we look at just this first category here, one chronic condition, two chronic conditions. The reality is these increase as we age, and the likelihood that we're going to be dealing with increasing health concerns as we go through retirement. And that's also something that we might need to be thinking about in our planning. And, you know, why do I bring this up? Really to prompt you to think about one of the things that can be destructive to one's wealth later in retirement, potentially, and particularly later in retirement typically, is if we do have longevity, we can have some challenges from the costs of long-term care. Now, there's multiple ways to approach that. Perhaps we have the sufficient resources to absorb those costs, but sometimes insurance can be a tool, or part of an estate plan can be a relevant way to think about this. But do take some time to give thought to how do I deal with this? Someone turning age 65 today has almost a 70% chance of needing some type of long-term care during their retirement. We see that women tend to have longer care needs than men, 3.7 years versus 2.2. Perhaps in this instance, maybe sometimes men are getting care from the women because they tend to be a little older and the women tend to be a little younger. And who knows, right? But one other thought here is 1/3 of today's 65-year-olds may never need long-term care, but 20% will need it for a period of longer than 5 years. So a lot of statistics that might be useful there. I thought I'd throw in some costs of care from a Genworth tool that we have. Basically, this is saying on Cape Cod what the estimated costs of full-time care for home care or assisted living, nursing home, semi-private versus private. I thought Naples is a common place for Cape Codders to spend time as well. So I thought that might be another location of interest. And you can see there are differences in how these play out. Where you get your care can make a difference. Most people want to be near family, but there are places in the United States where the cost of living is lower, and that's likely to have lower labor costs because this kind of care is often very much tied to the cost of labor. So in any case, these are the national averages, but I wouldn't encourage you to use the national averages in planning for your own considerations. I'd look at what it is more locally. And then, you know, these are considerations for in retirement. Oftentimes people think about at some point having a move in retirement, and it can be a good idea to think about making arrangements with a move where you might have the ability for one floor living, some of the amenities that can make it more likely that you can stay in your home if you should have issues with mobility or healthcare challenges over time. When it comes to insurance, a quick, basics of what is covered. The way long-term care insurance works is that there's a look at these activities of daily living. Think of the first 5 things you do every day. You get out of bed, that's mobility or transferring. You go to the bathroom, toileting, continence. Maybe you take a shower, bathing, get dressed, go have some breakfast. These are the kind of things that if you're unable to do typically 2 of these 5 things, you may be in a position, if you have insurance, where you're eligible to receive benefits. Most insurance products also have a cognitive impairment consideration, where if you are considered a danger if left alone, or a danger to others, if left alone, you may be eligible for some benefits under those circumstances. Most insurance policies that are traditional have a daily or monthly benefit that is calculated. There's an elimination period that is considered a deductible. The first 3 months typically is out of pocket. And then a duration. How long will the policy last if I take the maximum amount every day or every month or whatever the structure of it is? And you might choose that when you set up the policy: 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, etc. And do include an inflation consideration if you look to use long-term care insurance. Because if you don't and wait for it, just say I'll buy it along the way, you get priced out of being able to keep up with the costs of inflation. So know in advance what you can afford and deal with, and bite the bullet if you're going to get the insurance. When it comes to the traditional insurance, people have been frustrated by this because there have been premium increases, in part because insurance companies miscalculated some of the things we just talked about. The fact that people are living longer, they miscalculated interest rates being so low for so long, and the claims paying, the claims that have been hit with has increased. And so premiums have gone up. There are no products that I know of that have a guaranteed premium, but they are guaranteed not to be
lapsed.
Yeah, thanks. No,
You're welcome.
you basically don't have the issue that you can't that they'll take the insurance away from you. So in any case, these are all considerations. Now there are other products that many times people are interested in. And Jeff, if you want to chime in with anything else, feel free. But when it comes to long-term care, there's also hybrid products. So a combination of life insurance. Some products are designed for long-term care with a life insurance base structure. These are often single premium policies or a short-term payment structure. There are also policies that are general traditional life insurance policies that might have some accelerated death benefits that might be useful in long-term care scenarios, but aren't maybe as robust. There's also annuity products that can be useful in this. So when you're dealing with this, there might be a range of possibilities to consider. When you think about a single premium life policy, though, recognize you have a much bigger deductible in effect in that circumstance that you put on the line. Though these may, if you don't use the policy, unlike a traditional policy, you may actually get something back, some consideration. So there can be some benefit in that. Lots to consider, not necessarily the only way to go, but something for you to be tuned into. And it is important that when you think about these products, recognize these are typically traditional whole life or universal life type structures. They're permanent products. Many people do have term insurance going into retirement, and it is a common consideration of, do I need it? Should I keep it? Most people are in a position where it's optional. If you've created the wealth, that you don't need it. But some families, if they have a pension income, if they haven't taken a spousal benefit, they may want some insurance to replace that income if there's a need for it. Or if we don't have sufficient wealth to get both spouses, for example, through retirement, it can be important to think about income replacement, perhaps. And in some instances, people have illiquid assets like a business or real estate, and that can create a need for insurance as well. But for most, we find, or estate planning, people have a very large estate. These are also instances where some manner of insurance can be useful. But for most people, we find that insurance needs diminish as you get into retirement. So let me get to the next slide if I can. There we go. Keep in mind, if you have group insurance through work, that most times group insurance diminishes over time, or if there's a premium that you're paying, those costs will go up. Same with term insurance, often goes pretty costly over time. And then permanent insurance is typically whole life or universal life. But keep in mind, for example, not all insurance products are the same. When it comes to, say, universal life, there can be some products that have a guaranteed death benefit, but there can also be some that disappear when the cash value gets drained. So it is important to have some review of these from time to time. And if you need help from someone other than your insurance professional, you can certainly include that as part of your financial planning conversation. And as I mentioned, for estate planning purposes, sometimes people look to use an irrevocable life insurance trust as a way to remove wealth from their taxable estate, but have it available to their heirs. And that kind of leads us into our next topic, which is about legacy. I'll turn things over to Jeff Perry now.
Thank you, Chris. Usually when you bring up the subject of estate planning with a client, you either hear, oh, I did that 20 years ago, or you can see the emotion come out over their faces, and you can tell that they're going to have a problem facing their own mortality, and perhaps that they are delaying creating their estate and legacy planning because of those emotions. So I want you to think about estate planning maybe perhaps a little bit differently than you have in the past. Usually when you hear estate planning, people think about the documents that they have to create, and those are all certainly important, and we're going to touch upon them. But I want you to think about the word legacy first and estate planning second. And I want you to think it as a team approach, that you're going to bring your advisors together. You're going to work with certainly your financial advisor, certainly an experienced estate planning attorney. And you might even want to get your accountant involved in this, because you want to create a plan, not only that you have the right documents for the end of life, healthcare challenges, cognitive issues, and your ultimate death, but you also want to create a legacy planning where you leave a message to your family, not only about your assets, but about your love and your life. And if you bring all those together and you do it now, do it before you need to do it, not under the stress of some type of situation where you're suddenly get a bad diagnosis or some challenge or some cognitive issue. If you do it when you don't have to do it, you can really create a plan that not only meets your legal needs, but it's a very selfless act of love for your family to have a plan in place that will avoid family strife and that will send a message, perhaps for generations, about your life and how much you cared about the people that you left behind. Next slide, Chris. So this is so much more about you and your legacy than it is certainly about your money. How do you want to be remembered after you're gone? Some people have specific ideas that they want to bequest their money to certain individuals. That's the common thing, and there's nothing wrong with that. But other people have specific messages that they want to send with their estate plan, meaning maybe you want to provide for the education of your children and your grandchildren, and you can certainly do that. Maybe you want to do some generation skipping, giving to your children's children and skipping a generation. Perhaps you have some very specific charitable events or charitable causes that are really near and dear to you. So it could be people, it could be a cause, it could be a charity. This is really up to you and how you want your legacy, how you want your assets distributed. This can be very general, as some people do, or it can be very specific. And how do you best pass on your values? Well, you do it with how you distribute your assets, but you also do it with the messages that you leave. And some people, outside the context of written documents, some people leave messages, such as video messages, to their loved ones, telling them why they did certain things or the intent of why they had a certain distribution of assets. Some people write letters to their heirs. Some people either create legacy books. There's lots of online products on that you can create a legacy book that works with your estate planning document, certainly, but it tells more of a story than just the legal. parts of it. I guess my message is to be intentional about this process. It can be a very emotional process for people to think about their own mortality. It can be very stressful to think about where your assets are going to be left and to whom. But if you're intentional about it and purposeful about it, and you're not doing it under the stress of an event, you can certainly create a good plan, both to meet the legal needs, the financial needs, and to create a message or a legacy of how you want to be remembered. Next slide, Chris. So we do have to go back to the basics of estate planning. And there are these 5 basic documents that you'll deal with. Many of you listening know about them, but I'll just review them. Your will is, your will is where your assets are going, how your assets are to be distributed among your heirs. Excuse me. You're going to have to name an executor, someone to take care of your estate after you pass. It's the most basic of all your documents. A healthcare proxy is a directive that you leave, not for when you pass, but when you're alive, if you are no longer able to give informed consent regarding medical care and healthcare. If your healthcare proxy is invoked, which is the legal term, you, with a healthcare proxy, are designating a person or persons to make those decisions for you. And that's very important that you have this healthcare proxy. Think about it. If you don't have a healthcare proxy and you become disabled or cognitively unavailable to make your own decisions, and no one has the legal authority, a healthcare proxy, to step in with you, what happens? Well, someone has to run into court and get authorization from a court to be appointed to make those decisions for you. And that could be, time consuming and expensive, and perhaps a situation where you have family members, I hate to say it, arguing about who should be the healthcare proxy. So it's very important that you have this document. A living will, I call it the sister document to a healthcare proxy, because it gives specific directives and instructions to your healthcare proxy on how you want those decisions about your healthcare or end-of-life issues to be made. You may talk about end of life. You may talk about that you want certain types of such. Do you want to be artificially fed? Do you want to be on a respirator? And the conditions on which you want those things and others are spelled out specifically in the living will. And so your healthcare proxy has some guidance on how to make those decisions for you. Now think of a power of attorney, and there are lots of, you may have heard this term many, many times in different contexts. There are lots of powers of attorneys. There are general powers of attorneys, limited, special, and they all can deal with a variety of situations. But in the estate planning context, I want you to think about a durable power of attorney that you would be giving to someone who you completely trust to handle your financial matters if you were not able to handle those matters yourself, or you may be giving someone your power of attorney to handle those matters simply because you don't want to, or you can't keep up with them yourself. So think about it in the context of a healthcare proxy is someone to make your healthcare decisions for you when you're not able. A durable power of attorney gives someone the ability and the legal authority to make financial decisions for you if you're not able or you choose not to make them. And these two documents are totally separate, and they don't need to be the same person that you grant this authority to. In many cases, maybe it shouldn't be. The person making your healthcare proxy may have a whole different set of characteristics, experiences, location may matter than someone who you give your power of attorney to handle your financial matters might have. And the other common document that you hear of in estate planning is the word trust. And there are literally dozens of types of trusts out there. Some basics about a trust. The reason that people choose a trust, there's a few, but I'll give you the basics. It's very individualized, and I hate to use generalities, but just for education and to get you thinking about a trust. The reason someone might choose a trust is it's an ease of transfer to your beneficiaries when you pass. Meaning, if you have a will and you don't have a trust, if you have a will and you pass away, your executor has to present that will to a probate court to have the will probated, as they say. So there's a legal process. It's not an overly burdensome process. An attorney can help you with it, or you can do it yourself, but It's a process that's in court before a judge, and it is indeed somewhat public. So many people create trusts, put their assets in trusts, so that the transfer of your assets to your beneficiaries are done privately and without the need of probating your will. There's also an opportunity for you to deal with special family circumstances within a trust. Let's say you have one of your beneficiaries is potentially 18 years old or maybe older and not responsible. In other words, if you passed away and all of a sudden they get a sum of money, let's say they get $100,000 through your will, that may not be beneficial for someone who's young and or irresponsible, or maybe they've had an addiction, or maybe they have some other personal circumstances that it could actually be harmful for them to receive a lot of money. You can deal with these issues in a trust very specifically. And the other reason that many people create a trust is for planning for Medicaid or long-term care. These are all very unique. They're very specialized, and working with a qualified, experienced estate planning attorney will serve you well. The other educational part I want to give you, just to get you thinking about trust before you meet with your own estate planning attorney, is there's generally two ways to create a trust. One is a revocable trust, meaning you can change your mind about the things in the trust. You can terminate the trust. And then there's an irrevocable trust, which means almost always, generally, there's always exceptions to things in law, that you can't change your mind. You put your assets in an irrevocable trust. They're not intended for you to change your mind afterwards. Just a short word on do-it-yourself estate planning products. This isn't something you want to go on the cheap on. You know, there's certainly plenty of service. If you Google estate planning documents, and you're going to get endless opportunities to buy products or go, buy something for $200, fill in the blanks, state specific. They may say legal in all states, whatever they advertise. But this is about your assets. This is about, you've worked a lifetime to build your assets. You want to leave a legacy, a purposeful legacy. It's not worth saving a very small amount when you put it in the context of your estate. It's not worth it by doing it yourself. There's certainly opportunities for making mistakes, for executing them wrong, for not having it up to date, and for missing opportunities to do some very creative and innovative estate planning so that your legacy matches your estate planning documents. So please, don't do this yourself. Many things we can do ourselves, many things we should if we can, and estate planning and building your legacy is not one of them. Next slide, Chris. So we talked about the generalities of building an estate plan, but we all have special circumstances and issues in our life that might come up that when you work with an experienced estate planning attorney, you can address successfully and purposefully, intentionally in your estate planning document. So there's an endless list here, but let's just talk about some of the most common ones. If you own a business, and that may be an ongoing business, it may be a few rental properties. If you have any business entity at all, you have to think about what's going to happen when you pass with the running or maintenance or management of those business operations. So if you have time, you can build a longer term plan for transition of those business entities in your estate planning documents, and you can be very successful at that. Many of us think about estate taxes. The federal estate tax exemption right now is $12.9 million. So many of us won't get there. But if you live in a state like Massachusetts, who has a very low amount of the exemption, they did pass a law and it's going to be indexed in Massachusetts, but it's still one of the lowest in the nation. You may want to think about and talk to your estate planning attorney about this issue. And you say, well, I don't have $1 million. Well, maybe you do, because your home, if it's titled in your own names, would be part of your estate. Your retirement assets might be part of your estate, different assets. Certainly if you have a business, it's easy to get to $1 million, and you certainly want to avoid the state taxes if you can. So successful planning can help you do that. You may have a loved one with long-term needs, and you need to make accommodations for that in your estate plannings. If you simply leave a will and leave that loved one assets, you could do that. But then there's other steps that have to happen after you're gone. But with a trust, for example, for someone who has long-term care needs, you can be very specific about the dollar amount, who the trustee is, who's going to manage that for what specific types of care, and you can really provide for that loved one long after you're gone. Maybe you have lots of assets, such as a business. Maybe you have a couple of homes. Maybe you have a primary home on the Cape. And as Chris alluded to earlier, maybe you have a place in Naples. Not to be stereotypical, but I guess there's a lot of that going on. But you may not have much cash. You may have a pension and Social Security and you're cash flow positive, and you may have real estate. And so after you pass away, if you don't have money for estate taxes, or you don't have cash to equalize the distribution of assets that you may have among different beneficiaries, your assets might need to be sold. That may be something that you're good with. It may be something that you were hoping that didn't have to happen. Maybe it's a family home. So there's ways to deal with that. We talked about life insurance earlier. I just want to say that there's ways to deal with that and prepare for that. And then there's the sentimental gifts. Those could be family heirlooms, jewelry, art. These are all part of your legacy too. So if you don't deal with these in your estate planning documents, and you just say, divide everything up 3 ways for my 3 children, you could leave it in a situation where your children are actually fighting over some of your assets. There's plenty of tools to help you achieve your goals, not only your financial goals, but your legacy goals. You can do some annual gifting. Right now it's $17,000 a year per person. So if you have a spouse and you have a child, and you could give them $34,000. If that child had a spouse and you wanted to double it, you could. That amount of $17,000 is indexed for inflation, and it just means if you go over that, you'll have to provide a gift tax return. There is a lifetime exemption of over $12 million. So with proper planning, you can do a lot of gifting while you're alive if you like. On a personal note, my mother did that. She wanted to distribute her assets in her later years because she wanted to see her family members getting joy of the assets that she had, and she did. Relocating, you say, how does this deal with estate planning? Well, back to the estate tax. If you have a large estate and you are afraid of the Massachusetts estate taxes, you could move your home to that Naples condo and become a Florida resident. And, like many people have done, the Kennedys are a famous case that have done this, that have been in the news, but you can become a Florida resident, have no gift tax, and enjoy a little bit more sun. There's different types of trusts we talked about. This is something that you should talk to your estate planning attorney. Chris did a good job laying out the basics of long-term care. I'm just saying that this may also play into your estate plan. People have different views about their end of life and how they vision it. Some people have relationships with family members who want to step forward and care for individuals, parents, grandparents, and that's a lovely thing. Sometimes that care becomes impossible due to the nature of that care. Other people, when they're establishing their legacy and estate plan, don't want to be a burden as they see it to their family. So long-term care insurance might play into this. Chris did a good job of talking about how life insurance may or may not play into this. And a charitable remainder trust might be for you if you have assets. Usually it's assets that have built long-term capital gains built in. We see clients who don't want to sell assets they have because it creates intaxable accounts, because it creates income taxes, capital gain taxes, and they also have charitable intents, things that they want to do with their assets. So if you have a lot of assets with long-term capital gains built in, and you have specific charitable intents, and you would like some income from these assets while you're still living, these 3 things together might make you a candidate to think about a charitable remainder trust. Certainly happy to talk to you about that if it's right for you and your situation.
Jeff, I'll just add one caveat to remind our audience that if you take an interest in any of these possibilities when it comes to gifting or charitable trust, it may be helpful to forecast in your financial plan how these play out to make sure that we meet your needs over your lifetime as well as thinking about these other intentions.
Thank you, Chris. And that's a great segue into my last slide here. And because you should create your estate plan to work in tandem with your financial plan. As you're working with your attorney, your estate planning attorney, and perhaps your accountant, and working with your financial advisor, we can model. Scott did a great job at showing us some of the basics of the modeling programs that we have, but we can model up what does it look like for my own income while I'm alive and my own cash flows if I decide to do maybe gifting, maybe a charitable remainder trust, any of these things, the long-term care, they all fit into your same financial plan. So as you're thinking about your estate plan and how your assets are going to be distributed and when, and how you're going to build that legacy that leaves perhaps for generations a positive feeling about you and your life and your accomplishments, make sure it's all done at the same time with your trusted advisors. It's not only your financial advisors, your attorney, and your accountant, but you're also going to have to select an executor for your will, a trustee for your trust if you have one, power of attorney, and healthcare proxy. And that they should not just be someone who's competent to do this, but it should also be someone who understands you and your values and your goals. And as I said earlier, this does not have to be the same person. These could be all separate people. And I'd also encourage you to consider what actions you can take now to ensure your desired income, your outcome. If you have created that estate plan 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, and checked it off your list, it's time to review it, and it's time to see where you are in life. Coming into retirement is certainly the perfect time to do that, because things change, and estate plans are not meant to be created and put in the drawer and forgotten about. They're meant, just like your financial plan, to be reviewed and updated and considered on a periodic basis. So you may also want to do an ethical will, a legacy letter, and these are some things that we noted at the bottom of the screen that we did a webinar, and it's called The Legacy of Your Love and Values, How to Create a Legacy Letter. And you can see that on our website at amrfinancial.com. And we're very fortunate to work very closely with Boyd & Boyd PC. They're one of the premier estate planning firms on Cape Cod. And they have seminars, free seminars, where you can take this next step. A couple of them are noted here, and you can also go to their website, boydandboydpc.com. If you have an estate planning attorney that you're happy with, certainly stick with them, and we're happy to work with any estate planning attorney to make sure that your estate plan and your financial plan are working in tandem. If you'd like a second opinion or you don't have one, Boyd & Boyd's a good choice also. Thank you, Chris.
Let me just check for one more, and I will mention to our audience that we do have the upcoming Economic and Market Outlook webinar scheduled for October 25th from 10 to 11:30. It is recorded as well, but if you're able to attend, you can scan the QR code if you'd like to right now, and be brought to the page to register. With that, gentlemen, I don't see any questions. Is there anyone see something I'm missing? I don't think so. I don't hear anybody. So checking the Q&A looks empty, and the chat looks empty as well. So thank you all for participating. And if you have any questions, do not hesitate to reach out to us at Asset Management Resources through our website, amrfinancial.com, or by phone at toll-free 866-771-8901. I hope we can be of help. Thanks for joining us for the webinar today, and hope we'll talk to you soon.